Welcome to Commerce Media Matters, your go-to podcast for unpacking the world of commerce media. Here, we catch up with industry leaders on news, research, insights, perspectives, and everything in between.
Hi, I'm Nick.
And I'm Paul. With us today is Gai Le Roy, CEO of IAB Australia, the peak industry body representing digital advertising here in Australia. With a career spanning decades in digital media research and audience measurement, she's been instrumental in shaping industry standards, leading important conversations on measurement and privacy, and helping businesses navigate the media landscape. If there's one person that can decode the complexities of digital advertising, it's Gai. She's been firsthand now driving the industry forward as it's evolved over the past few years, and from its early stages right through to the big shifts in privacy regulations that we saw late last year. So we've got plenty to unpack here, so let's dive in. Gai, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks, Plackers. Thanks, Nick.
So good to have you here. We have been trying to connect in person for weeks, haven't we? It's a joy to have you here today. I really appreciate it.
Easy.
So let's kick off. Gai, you've been in the industry since, I guess, pop-up ads were invented, since, banner ad sizes weren't standard. And fast forward today, we're in an era of consumer privacy, consent, data ethics. And these concepts are all more important than they've ever been before. So how has the conversation around consumer trust evolved? And do you think the industry is keeping pace with the expectations of consumers?
I think it goes in waves. Like if I think back to, as you've pointed out, I'm very old. If I think about to the
That's
early
not what
days
I was referring to.
I'm happy to own.
That was good. That was good already.
I'm
Get
happy
straight
to
in there,
own age
Plackers.
diversity. I'm very pleased to own that one. Because if I think back to when, like every new wave of the internet, there's a certain amount of distrust, discomfort, getting used to things. Early days of the internet, no one knew what was going on. So I think it continues to change. There's more connections. So people are going to more websites, more apps, dealing with more retailers. So it is hard to understand, where your data's going, who to trust. And that's just the nature of us wanting more as people. So it's like this delicate dance that we keep getting, new devices, new connections, more transactions. And we want that while we're still scared of the, where our data's going, how it's being used. So it's this constant dance to keep up with what consumers expect, needing transparency. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting in terms of the waves and some of the more brands with longevity and trust, when there is discomfort, definitely shine through. And some of those other newer brands need to do, spend a bit more on establishing their connection with consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Gai, the IAB plays such a crucial role, and it's been somewhat of a guiding light for a lot of what we do here. And we've been really fortunate to be involved in a number of kind of projects. And, I know that, you bring together so many kind of groups and leaders, News Corp, Nesso, and everyone's kind of adding. And we were actually part of the retail media committee and working on certain kind of projects that add lots of value, and we try to give back as much as we can. Given that we know we were, recently had Jason Westcott from Europe on board and the projects they've been working on, what kind of projects are coming up? And do you find, like off the back of what we just spoke then in regards to data and privacy, are you finding that you're having to lean into more projects such as that to explore those things to be able to inform the industry?
Absolutely. And more, my job in the IAB's role around, data and privacy and the connection with different regulators, has ramped up 1,000%. So we have quite different stakeholders. If I think back to the early days of the IAB, it was all just around, marketing the industry, please spend more. And now it is really that governance and responsibility piece. So we've got sort of 5 key themes in Australia, and they're not specific to retail media, but they play across. We've got 13 different councils and working groups, so who are all trying to navigate the space.
Quite a few, isn't it? Yeah.
But data and privacy is absolutely number one. Trying to look at the global requirements, but also how they fit into a global world. Like the local and global mix is really tricky for particularly retailers or anyone in the transaction space, because they're likely to have customers from other markets. We've got this wild patchwork of privacy in the States. Europe's completely different. So keeping across all of that is really hard. So data and privacy is our number one theme. We can talk a bit more about that later. Transparency, and that can mean a myriad of different things, but that from a consumer point of view, but also a client point of view. What are people buying? What are they getting? Measurement is just like, that can be there. Yeah, it just stays there forever, changes what it means, but it's there. Sustainability, which is, a huge one, just making sure that we're being responsible as an industry. And then we've got our last bucket, which is really preparing for the future, which is a bit of a coverall, but AI sits firmly in there. And I know, Paul, you're particularly excited about AI, the industry overall. So that one trying to, that governance piece is going through all of them a lot more than it used to, as we're a $16 billion industry. Like in Australia, it's huge. So
it's huge. It's massive. Yeah.
Look, having just stepped down from my part on the board, Gai, I just wanted to give a shout out to you guys, because as you said, there's 13 different working groups, but I think unlike maybe traditional media industries, it's the pace of rapidity that these groups have to move at, because it's forever changing. And, I, for one, feel like the IAB is more important than ever in helping shepherd all the companies that are, and the whole ecosystem, particularly here in Australia, around all these changing environments. I mean, we just ended talking about AI. This is a concept that every single business is grasping with, and it's moving at such a rapid pace. You see China launch DeepSeek, then you see Elon Musk come back with the smartest, agent ever, and all of these things are happening, and they've got real business application, and everyone's looking to you guys. So look, hats off to you for managing with what is a very small staff, and you do a very good job. So a bit of a shout out to the IAB now no longer being a part of it as much as I was before.
The themes are a lot more common across the globe. So we lean very heavily on IAB Europe, IAB UK, the US. So particularly around those government regulations. And we're seeing the US go in a slightly different direction on bits and pieces. So trying to navigate what that means, when you're fairly pinned down, it's really hard to give those answers to people where things will end up. But you've just got to think around, if you are a advertiser or retailer, what's the best thing for your customer base, and go back to that, sort of almost this ethical treatment that suits your brand, obviously while fitting into whatever the local, regulation piece is. But all those, all those big themes. And then we've got our retail media working group, which I think we'll debate what that name means at some point. But, they'll be working on a whole lot of pieces this year. So a big consumer research piece we do each year, trying to understand what's driving consumers to make choices, how they're feeling about data. We do a big retail media state of the nation, so talking to suppliers and agencies around how they're investing, what measurement they're expecting back, just where the industry's going. We're doing a lot more of trying to understand the supplier side of things, who probably haven't been as front and center in these conversations. And then
great point. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we'll continue to sort of build out sort of knowledge series on different hot topics. But, that group that we've got, it's got 30 different companies in there. It's the hottest ticket in town. Nick, I know you guys have been OGs, so a lot of work will come out of that group this year.
Do you think there's a shift with your working group? Because you just mentioned it there in regards to how you approach retail media, or is it a larger piece of commerce media and retail media? Because that's something that Paul and I debate all the time. We actually opened up the podcast last year with what is this?
Yeah.
And, where do you sit on that, retail media versus commerce media, and who's inside what, who, where?
It's a really tricky one, and it gives us a chance to be philosophers in our, when we're often so transactional in our industry. But look, the trend seems to be, and I know you guys have been sort of on this bandwagon, that commerce is an umbrella term.
Yeah.
We're starting to see obviously finance, we've got a range of different players that are close to transaction, but we've also got people in the mix that are, I guess, screen networks that don't necessarily always have transactional.
You're absolutely spot on there.
The stuff that O Media is doing.
Yeah, and it's all really important, but I don't know if eventually the word commerce goes away and it's media again. So, does it eventually break down a bit further?
There's some really interesting things happening with connected screens. There's some really interesting stuff happening outside of what would be deemed to be retail media, where they're taking a network from a large amount of screens and bringing it together and being able to provide new inventory which is what the exciting part for that space as well. So, yeah, I think it's a big conversation we'll continue to have.
Yeah, and then there's sort of, I don't want to call them intermediary, but the ones that are sitting on top of the retailers, like a Cash Rewards or an Afterpay. So there's just so many different layers with different opportunities. But I can imagine from an agency and client point of view, completely confusing. I think to date, the term retail media has been so hot in the Australian market and just implies growth that everyone has wanted to keep that label front and centre. But I'm imagining, much like the US has shifted to commerce, that we will start seeing that shift as well.
And Gai, do you think, you brought it up there yourself, I think it's important for the end client to be able to integrate this into their overall marketing mix. You know, you said that it remains separate. Most people are going by the term retail media, but you mentioned, you know, the banks are getting involved. You've got the out-of-home companies providing a retail media solution. Do you think that the agencies and clients are grappling with this problem of the fragmentation that retail media networks are causing? And do you think that they're asking for it to be looked at as just digital media?
Short answer is no, I don't think they're coming to terms with it. I think they're sticking to their safe places. So I think there's a lot of endemic stuff with the retailers. Everyone's already had all those partnership relationships. Anyone non-endemic, I think, is completely lost at the moment. They might be throwing a bit into Amazon, trying to understand the other opportunities. So I think what we're seeing is sort of the specialist peak, but not growing the market in an even sense. And look, even trying to understand, like, let alone the term, there's a lot of debate around the size of the market, trying to understand what dollars are flowing in, because we haven't defined what the market is. We keep changing it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are not sharing their data. So there's some big numbers floating out there that everyone thinks are probably too high, but it's very hard to anchor what it actually is.
And what do you think we could do to make it a bit easier for the client? I mean, at the end of the day, we're all here to sort of serve that client requirement for marketing and ultimately the consumer. But what do you think that retail media, as they're called today, could be doing better to make it a little bit easier for clients?
So we're talking about releasing sort of a matrix of what type of offerings are in market, what that means for the data you get back, and what it means for the consumer. So that might be a starting point. I think there's always going to have to be deeper relationships. And it's just going to be a competitive market. Like, you know, at the beginning of any industry, there are a lot of people trying to differentiate. Some will end up merging, partnering. So we can do a bit to help, but I just think it's the nature of a new market and people running after the dollars, which is absolutely how innovation happens and growth happens.
That's right, yeah.
Gai, I wanted to just land on a couple of points there and maybe drill into something a little bit more tactical, if I can get your opinion. You talk about measurement and you also talk about screens. It's something that's quite pertinent to our business as we're growing into the CTV space. CTV being an exciting space for retail media, for commerce media. There's a lot of new ad formats, new spaces here, and commerce media is kind of making a dent in this, and I think it will grow into and add more value. There's a question around measurement, attribution. How do you think that's going to be solved? Do you have any kind of direction of travel you think people are going to take?
Oh, look, people are lazy, so we've got to be really careful.
Yeah.
We've seen that in digital over and over again. So I do fear it will get very last click, you know, the transaction piece at the end without a lot of smarts there.
Yeah.
We've seen the affiliate industry not move on because it's too hard. Like, it is very hard, like if you're trying to reward someone, you know, how that works. So I'm hoping we'll do two things. So we'll be able to get a better way of measuring, you know, that journey within a campaign, and we'll go back to how that might work. And then I'm also hoping things like market mix modelling get smarter, that they can pull apart newer formats, synergy, and I hate that word, but synergy between different formats as well.
Yeah.
But on the, I guess, the media placement piece, I mean, we're still arguing around TV ratings and streaming ratings. So I'm not promising to solve all that because everyone feels they've got something to lose. So it's very hard to get consensus over the
Yes, a good point.
over the ecosystem. But there is a lot of excitement from streamers in particular on working with retail media companies. And we've seen that in the US, those partnership deals.
Absolutely.
So possibly in some of those relationships, setting upfront expectations and way of measuring might help that, because it's all going to come down to how people are rewarded. But Nick, long way of saying measurement will always be in contention.
Yeah, contention and always be debated, right?
Absolutely. And
Everyone will always have their position.
and each client will want something different. I mean, retail media and, some of my council members will probably, call me after this for saying this, but, a lot of the promises of that closed loop reporting, very granular data going back to suppliers has probably been over-egged. And
Yeah,
I think
right.
we're just growing up now. I think that's
Well, you heard it first here. There's a hot take right there.
I know some of my neighbours will be calling me, but, it's again, it's just that, there's a bit of a marketing narrative and then actually working out how everything works. And, if the privacy piece comes into play, there's some things you just shouldn't share and can't share.
Oh, there's some things that, supply side or, buyer side want and they can't either or can't share for certain commercial reasons.
Or are reluctant to share until they know what the standard is, right? I mean, you've got the promise of retail media is that you can measure the interaction and all the way through to transaction. But are we seeing retail media networks share that back to the original client or the general space because they're not sure what good looks like in this space yet? I mean, I'm aware of several campaigns that we ran in my former job at News Corp where underlying the data was there, but the clients are reluctant to share this stuff. And the only way that you can get this sort of stuff out there as a benchmark is through case study and showing what is a successful benchmark. Then the retailers will be more inclined to share the data that they've got because they'll be able to say, well, this benchmarked against that, which has become the standard, is successful. And I don't think we've sort of been there long enough to know what a successful retail media campaign is because it's moving so fast.
Yeah, and there's also there's a whole lot of factors. There's competing natures within those big retailers as well, and they're used to different metrics. Like, I'm teaching viewability 101 to a lot of retailers at the moment. So, there's measurement guidelines that we've put out that IAB Europe, that IAB US. So there's some commonality of language, understanding of different methods. IAB Europe are rolling out a really interesting project sort of certifying retailers.
Yeah, right.
That they're following certain practices and protocols.
We'd heard of that.
Jason Westcott mentioned it to us, yes, yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes that will be built to work with what we think of the retailers, but will that work with the rest of commerce media? So that will continue to play out. But trying to educate trade marketers from a supply sense, on digital metrics and then, training digital buyers on what retail metrics, there's still a lot of work to do there. It's such different language and different.
And that's one of the big problems with retail media, isn't it, Gai? And you mentioned before you're doing some work around the trade side because there is that sort of tension between how trade money has always been utilised with a retailer and now there's retail media and they're converging into almost one. And there's that complexity too, isn't there?
Yeah. And look, we're in the media industry so used to showcasing, wanting a lot of publicity for everything we're doing, talking about it. But suppliers are not like that. They're highly, protective of their IP, of their, with their competitors. So there's also that sort of factor. I mean, you guys both know getting a case study over the line with a client's name on it is not an easy thing. If it's gone well, they want to keep that secret sauce. And if it hasn't gone well, they don't want to tell anyone about it. So it's very tricky. But yeah, we are getting feedback from suppliers on at least those generic needs that they have. And hopefully over time we'll get a bit more aggregated data to your point of what, benchmarks, what's good, what's bad, that we can share with the market.
So a lot of this is that transparency factor. We're talking about the case studies, about clients with successful case studies want to keep that close to their chest. So it's all about transparency before we can get to, understanding what is working in this space. You mentioned transparency at the top of the podcast, Gai, and you're doing a lot of work there. How do you see that space evolving?
Again, it's a tricky balance and privacy comes into this as well. So, we see expectation from regulators that consumers understand or are told what's done with their data, which is a really tricky thing. Like our industry is quite complicated to try and explain to a consumer, what you're collecting, why you're collecting it, and possibly what you're sharing with someone else. But that's absolutely the expectation of regulators. So we're going to have to get better at having that language front and center and giving consumers control of what they can opt in and out of, what that value exchange. It's interesting in the retail space, it's slightly different than media and in a good and bad way. So consumers understand a lot more why the data is being collected. Like, you need it to ship me my thing, or, you understand what products I'm buying. But they're very nervous around third-party relationships. So as the industry grows, as data is shared, we talked about partnerships with CTV, there's obviously a whole lot of, off-platform opportunities. That's where that nervousness sets in, and it's where the regulators don't understand why things are happening. So the increased smarts around privacy-enhancing technologies, making at least the industry and regulators feel comfortable if data is shared, it's in a way that can't be breached, it can't be leaked, it's, anonymized, encrypted, whatever sort of method is happening. We're going to have to get a lot better at that, explaining what's going on and ensuring those practices are set up very, very early on. One thing we talked a little bit about data collection, and I'm going to connect that with AI. So the more that AI gets smart, synthetic data is used, first-party data will always be incredibly powerful for both targeting and measurement, but there are increasing opportunities to use AI to actually, feed into the idea of cohorts, aggregated reporting, still without losing, that understanding of what's working. But there's a lot of work being done in that space, and I'm really excited of how more accurate that may make the data space. We've seen in the past some really dubious quality of data going into the ecosystem on both that input, targeting and measurement side.
Yeah.
But, those smarts that AI enables, that crunching, that, cohort approach.
Agreed.
Apple has sort of led us there screaming and kicking.
Yeah.
But, we're sort of, those expectations have been set a lot more, and I am excited what the tech can do to help everyone in the space.
Don't say, Gai, please don't say anything ill of Apple. Paul will leave the podcast.
It's a little fanboy that I am, yeah. But Gai, you're such a professional. You've even segued to our next question anyway around AI. So
I know. I was like, you're doing the job for us.
That's right.
AI, yeah. So look, AI, really interesting. I was as recently, it's good to see some of the different country regulators getting together. So there was an aligned principles in AI between, and I'm probably going to get the countries here wrong, but it was the OIC in Australia. So we have an amazing privacy commissioner who actually tries to balance business needs and consumer needs and understand the new tech. Yep. Along with, I think it was South Korea, France, the UK, some big markets who went, we are all aligned on, I guess, the responsible development of AI. Very high level, but great starting point for governments to build on and for industry to align around. So that's, I guess, the governance piece. In terms of the innovation, I mean, it's,
how do you keep up with it?
You guys can probably talk to it more than me. It's like
it's one of your themes, right? Probably a major piece of one of your major themes.
Yeah. So we're setting up an AI working group because we didn't have enough working groups. But even just trying to define the scope of that, because it can quickly get it can go everywhere, right? It can mean anything. But, us trying to anchor it around AI and advertising. But even that flows through to absolutely everything: ad product, measurement, targeting, the way creative in particular. Who would have thought the creative element was sort of impacted first? It's
Yeah, exactly. And search, which is one of the largest parts of our ecosystem, is going to be heavily impacted by AI. I mean, I just don't know how you keep up with it. There's literally an announcement every night. I go to bed thinking the world is okay again, and then I wake up in the morning and something new's happened, and I'm like, what does this mean? Are we at Terminator levels, or, how fast are we moving? And with the American politics, with Donald Trump sort of taking, I guess, the lead in the arms race, I guess, there is now an arms race.
Absolutely.
Around the AI, to control all the AI. So how do you think Australia can keep up with that sort of innovation that's happening in those two countries? And you see Europe announced their big investment in being an AI superpower as well. How do we keep up, little old Australia? We're pretty innovative, but how do we keep up?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I mean, we have to look at our R&D world. I'd love to see more investment from government, encouragement there. You're right. We, by nature, are scrappy, so like to invent and try new things. But,
Yeah.
Some of this stuff takes, a huge amount of resource to actually do properly.
Can I just jump in there is that, for example, just kind of thought there, is that where a body like the IAB has a relationship or would establish a relationship with the Tech Council Australia, where we see the chair, Robin Denholm, really pushing into seeing how we can unpack and have a more vibrant and strong R&D program? That's obviously something that would actually help this industry. Do you work with the Tech Council Australia? Is that something you would do, or you are already?
Yeah, not deeply. We definitely have relationships. We touch base with them on different government things.
Yeah.
It'd be a nice relationship because they're really not focused on advertising at all, even though some of their large stakeholders have ad businesses. So
No.
it's definitely something to look at.
Yeah.
It's also, the thing I do worry about is just how globally focused the members of that group are. So it probably is a good opportunity to actually showcase local innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I'd agree. Absolutely.
Because if we think about the ad industry and, Paul knows this from his time on the board, I mean, it is increasingly global. So when you're talking about changes in the US, the majority of our ad market is, US companies driving that.
Absolutely. And being an Australian company ourselves, technically exporting because we're scaling and we're now working in Canada, US, across Europe, and hats off to our team, the work that needs to go into being able to accommodate all those different privacies and laws and regulations and the transparency. It's hard work. And there's a lot of companies like us in Australia actually doing some really amazing stuff. So I think there's something there to kind of work together collectively for the better.
Just showcasing, because it is hard to get cut through, but
yeah.
We do. Like we've got, if you look at Voodoo, definitely, News Corp helped with that as well. Like definitely has cut through.
Absolutely.
Companies like, Mutinex seems to be the PR machine that it is.
Yeah.
So I think we can come at it from a very Australian angle, which is quite noisy, adding that extra layer of value because it's going to be very hard to compete on the compute sort of element. There's only going to be so many companies in the world who have the resources and money, both private companies, but also, it's defense departments, it's China, it's,
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's adding that layer and looking for the opportunities that haven't already been tackled. Whereas I guess that big boys tech bro fight at the top end of town, we definitely have to watch because it sets the ecosystem and the infrastructure. But I think there's very different ways of playing it and adding value and highlighting what Australia can do in other markets. I mean, there's opportunities with Tech Council. There's opportunities with, highlighting what's that sort of LA event? They have G'day Australia every year, like actually just the chambers of commerce.
Getting involved there.
Great idea.
The consoles in other markets because there's VC money around at the moment.
Particularly for AI. There's some big numbers around for anything in the AI space, isn't there?
Absolutely.
And Gai, with obviously being on the board last year, it was all about the Privacy Act and so forth. And obviously we're going to see an election, but then a second tranche will come through. Have the government got AI regulation in their sights from your discussions with them?
They have. The tricky thing is a bit like business, a little bit. There's siloed conversations, which I'm hoping so there's different departments, different ministers looking at AI from different angles. The delay of the privacy reform is annoying, but it has given us the opportunity to try and tie those pieces together. So I'm hoping that, the conversations and that second tranche when it does come out, I mean, it has to be very principles-based because, as you said, every couple of days there's an update to something.
That's right.
But that will come into play. The overlap of privacy, online safety, AI, there's just some common themes that we have to make sure they're not in conflict. And the government, I do feel for the departments because they, may or may not have a new minister in a minute. So there will be a little bit of a delay. Elections always create a little bit of a delay, but those cross-departmental conversations, becoming a lot more positive.
But regardless of which government we see, we're certainly going to see this space heat up and as an issue for the government, whichever one it is, to face, aren't we?
Absolutely. And the tricky thing with data privacy is, whenever I talk to a politician or a big brand, it jumps straight to data breaches. Data security is the best thing that we can do for our industry. The targeting and the IP definition, all that is really important. But at the end of the day, when there is harm is when it becomes an issue. And every extra data breach that happens puts the whole industry back by, a million steps. So there's cynicism from regulators that we can manage ourselves.
Yeah.
So, anyone in this ecosystem, first step is data security, looking at those privacy enhancing techniques, and then, layering in, their practices and protocols in terms of consumers and how they handle the data. But every big corporate data breach it sends everyone into a flurry.
Great. Well, so now we'll just do a quick fire question round, Gai. So I'll just ask you about 5 questions, and it's kind of just what's the answer top of mind, just a little bit of fun, just to end the podcast. So Gai, what's the last thing that you bought online?
Last thing I bought online, and I'm trying to think because I got something from a large global retailer that dominates the space. And actually it's a book, and it's a book on the history of the New York Post.
Oh, wow.
That's an interesting book.
I will read anything around the media industry, where it's come from, because that will help us understand where we're going.
Great.
Okay, on that same vein then, apart from this podcast, which clearly you're listening to every episode that we drop.
Of course.
Absolutely.
What podcast are you currently listening to, Gai?
I am a huge podcast listener, so I have about 20 industry ones and then 10 for fun. So industry-wise, I do morning industry and nighttime fun, what I call fun, which might not be everyone's take on it. But in the morning, so I will do Pivot.
Love Pivot.
I will do 7 a.m. I'll do a news podcast.
Great.
MI3, Mumbrella. From my job, I have to be across all those, but I also enjoy them. Ad Exchanger. So try and get that mix of local and global, and ones that really challenge me. And then in the afternoon, I'm an arts and books person, so there'll be book review shows, theatre reviews, stuff to relax and make me remind me of the art in our world, which we sometimes forget in the advertising industry, which
we do, don't we?
We shouldn't, right? We create art.
Theatre reviews, does that mean that you're contemplating doing the Christmas pantomime again, Gai?
I am actually. We missed it last year. So for those who are not across that, we ran a pantomime raising money for children in need that basically took the piss out of our industry. Including some large companies that we may or may not have been.
Gai wrote it, directed it, acted in it, starred in it, and was fantastic. It was so funny.
Oh, we've got to see that again.
We're going to do an AI one this year, so it's going to be,
Oh, you have to.
So back to the questions, and I think you gave us a hint at this one. What's your go-to online shop?
I try to spread my love around. I'm also a huge greenie, so I don't buy a lot of new stuff. So I'm a vintage clothes shopper. So I'll do quite a lot of eBay and Etsy or direct with retailers. Amazon I use, but I try not to buy too much new stuff. And I'm trying to convince my parents to allow me to online shop groceries for them. That's the battle I'm fighting at the moment.
And last but not least, if there's one ad campaign that sticks in your head, what's your most memorable advertising campaign?
Most memorable. It's awful. We always jump back to our childhood ones here, don't we? Yeah.
Well, they're ingrained, right? They're so prominent in our minds.
For me, growing up, it wasn't one campaign, but it was the theme. It was those big Coke ads at the cinema every year. Like just sitting there watching young, beautiful people jump around with a beach ball, music, visually fantastic. You're excited about being at the movies the first time. So that experiential. And I guess things like the lamb ads feed into that. So something that builds on an existing legacy.
And the narrative.
They're incredible franchise of ads over time, aren't they? Yeah.
And they build excitement around actually wanting to see an ad. So we need to encourage people to want to see ads.
We do. Yeah.
That's it from the quick fire round. Gai, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, no, easy. Thanks for having me.
This has been great.
Nick, good to I feel like
it's an honour.
Feel like we haven't got to know each other well enough. I know your team are really involved, so
we will make it happen. I know we've been trying to for some time, so we'll.
I'd say be careful what you wish for, Gai.
Thanks for having me here, guys. It was so much fun.
Thank you, Gai.
Thanks, Gai.
Thank you for listening to the Commerce Media Matters podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow and subscribe. We're always on the pulse of the ever-changing landscape of commerce media, ready to share the newest trends, insightful perspectives, and expert opinions with you. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep making media that matters. This podcast is executively produced and edited by Priya Tahazadeh, with co-producers Sandy Ho, Meg Lirish, and me, Rachel Fang. This podcast is recorded on the lands of the Bidjigal, Gadigal, and Wurundjeri people, and we wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land.